There can't be many in the world as foolish as I am. So let me say this to my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Listen to what I have to say, and may the scoundrels and fools especially take my story as a lesson. I was the child of my father's concubine. She fell out of favor with him, and I was born in her family home. I was then taken in by my father's wife. I think of her as my real mother, and put under the care of a wet nurse. I was naughty from the time I was little and made life difficult for my mother, and with my father away at his office every day, I acted up and was so headstrong that all were at their wits' end. Or so our old retainer Reiji told me years later. We lived in the Aberhori section of Fukugawa. In the garden there was an ornamental pond that was filled with water drawn from one of the nearby canals. During the summer, I would swim in it every day. I knew that my father returned from work around 2 in the afternoon, so just before he came back, I would get out of the water and amuse myself with something else, looking like the picture of innocence. My father would ask Reiji why the water in the pond was always so muddy. Old Reiji said that he had never quite known what to say. My mother suffered from palsy and had trouble getting around. The rest of the household was also female. I looked down on all of them and spent my days getting into one kind of mischief or another. My older brother, Hikoshiro, already lived in his own house and had no idea what was going on. When I was 5, I took part in a kite fight against Chokichi, the son of a laborer in Meicho. Chokichi, who was older by about 3 years, seized my kite, smashed it, and took away the string. I picked up a jagged rock and, grabbing hold of the collar of his kimono, I hit him in the face. Blood came spurting out of his mangled lips, and Chokichi began bawling. My father happened to see this from over the garden fence. He sent one of his men to fetch me home. "What do you mean?" he said angrily. "Hurting someone's child like that? You cannot be left unpunished." He tied me to one of the posts in the veranda and whacked me on the head with a wooden clog. To this day, I have a bald spot and a dent where he struck me. The razor gets caught and nicks the skin whenever I have my head shaved, and each time I'm reminded of Chokichi. My mother would put away the sweets and cakes that people gave us, and I would steal them, so she took to hiding them here and there. Sooner or later, I would find them anyway, but she could never bring herself to report it to my father. In fact, since she had been the one who decided to take me in, she covered up for me all the time. And as for the servants and retainers in the house, they were too much in awe of her to say a word to my father. I grew up a real hell-raiser. One year on Boys' Day in the 5th month, sheaves of irises had been hung under the eaves, as was the custom. I kept stealing them so I could play a game of slap the Irish leaves with my friends. At first Reiji said nothing, but by the 5th time it happened, his patience had run out. "Enough is enough," he complained to my father. "Look," my father replied, "children are supposed to be full of spirit, otherwise they become sickly and have to see the doctor. Just buy plenty of irises and keep hanging them up." And a lot of bother it was too, Reiji sighed, after he told me this story when I was 16 or 17. Old Reiji worked up for us for many years, even going all the way to the Shinano province to accompany Hikoshiro, who had been appointed as the administrator of a shogunal district. The retainers my brother took with him at the time were of non-samurai rank. They were each given money to buy samurai status when they returned to Edo 5 years later. Reiji alone decided to retire, and taking his share of money went to live with a relative. He was cheated of every penny by this man and obliged to come back to my brother's house. There he was regarded by the other retainers as a nuisance. I felt sorry for Reiji, and after arranging for him to become a lay priest, I sent him off on a pilgrimage around the country. That didn't last long, and I next set him up as a caretaker at the Kannoju temple at Yanaka. He died shortly after, but all this took place years later when I was about 30. I was adopted by the Katsu family when I was 7. My age was officially given as 17, and the hair at the front of my head was cut off accordingly. As part of the adoption procedure, Ishikawa Ukohana no Goshigen, the commissioner of my unit at the Kokubushin Gomi, and his assistant, Obi Dashichiro, came to the house. "How old are you and what is your name?" Ishikawa asked. "My name is Koichi and I am 17. Ishikawa pretended to be taken aback. "Well, for 17 you certainly look old." He burst out laughing. My adoptive father's older brother, Oike Jinbei, who served at the Edo Castle as a member of the Great Guard, acted as my sponsor. Until that point, I had been called Kamamatsu. With my adoption name was changed to Koichi, my adoptive parents had already died, leaving behind a daughter and her grandmother. It was decided that the two would live at my father's place in Fukugawa. I was completely ignorant of these arrangements and spent my time in play. I got into another fight over a kite, again with some boys from Meicho. There must have been 20 or 30 of them. I took them on alone, hitting and punching, but they finally got the better of me. I was cornered on a large rock in an open field and struck over and over and over with bamboo poles. My hair had fallen loose all over my face, and I was sobbing. I took out my short sword and slashed left and right. But I knew I was beaten and decided then and there to commit harakiri. I stripped to the waist, sat down on the rock. As it so happened, a rice dealer by the name of Shirakoa was standing nearby. He talked me into giving up the idea and took me home. After this, though, all the boys in the neighborhood became my followers. I was 7 at the time. Hi there, my name is Steve Gearhart, and this is the Unagi Observer. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching the video. I hope you enjoyed that reading. That came from Musui's story, the autobiography of a Tokugawa samurai. Musui is a pen name for the actual person whose name is Katsu Kokichi. Samurai of that period of time, Tokugawa period, there weren't very many wars. There were actually more samurai than there were actual jobs, and so a lot of samurai kind of had to do things to make ends meet. And one of the things that they would do is later in life they would talk about their life and tell stories and make a small book and sell it, and that way they would publish it and sell it and get some money that way. So this is his book of that, of his life, so to speak, and it's kind of interesting for two reasons. The first reason is that in terms of Katsu Kokichi, he did exist. Some of the things, more factual things that he talks about himself are true, but the rest of it's embellished, and there's quite a bit of lies in here. And so a lot of historians go, well, we don't know exactly if some of this is actually true or not. But the reason why this book is often cited is because it gives an excellent view into Tokugawa period of Japan, or the Edo period of Japan. This is post-Sengoku period, which is the Warring States period, where Japan was mired in war for like over 130 or 150 years. And this is towards the end of the Edo period, Tokugawa period, wherein this was actually published in 1843, about 9 or 10 years before Commodore Perry would show up on the shores of Japan. So this kind of gives you a really good snapshot of how things worked in Tokugawa, Japan. We're talking about bureaucracy. We're talking about how shogunate does things, how samurai of that time did things, and how the samurai were no longer the fierce warriors that they used to be, but now bureaucrats. So a lot of that is very well documented in here, and so it's very interesting. So if you happen to see this book on the shelf somewhere, you might want to get it, because it is it's an entertaining story from the perspective of how he talks about himself. But if you're a historian, you want to know more about Japanese history, this is a really good way to kind of understand how a shogunate government works. So let's get into what I read. So what I read is like the first part of the chapter called Childhood, and he's talking about when he was born, what his station in life was like. So when he's born, he freely admits that he was the son of his biological father and a concubine. A little bit of word of Katsu's father. Katsu's father was a minor administrator within the shogunate, stationed in Edo, which means a couple things. His job was stable, which means that he did a good job and he was in favor of the shogunate. Their family had a very good stipend of koku, rice, which translates into a ryu, or money, the coin of the realm. And so his family had enough money for Katsu's father to have a concubine and also a regular family. And so this was not unusual, by the way. This isn't something like, oh my God, he was cheating on his wife. No, this was a thing. This is what happened. If you were in the shogunate administration and you were high enough and you had enough money, you kind of did these things. Now, also what's not unusual is for a parent, the father, to adopt the biological son from a different woman. So when you are born into a family, your mother and your father are married, then you kind of have more rights. You kind of have more. You can expect more familial rewards and obligations. If you're born outside of that family unit, for example, your father concubine like Katsu, your life path can take two different directions. You can stay within the home of your mother, which in this case was the Otani clan, or your father might formally adopt you as part of his household. Family and household are two different things. So by adopting him into the household, he's making him Katsu part of his family. And he's saying that in terms of administrations, in terms of face, in terms of honor, and these kinds of things, I want Katsu to be a part of that. So Katsu becomes part of the Kokichi clan and starts to adopt a samurai lineage as a result. Again, this is not unusual. This happens quite frequently. Primogeniture in Japan is not as strict as it would be in other places in the world, like in China or in Europe, medieval Europe, that kind of thing. The first son doesn't always get the rewards, right? But it usually works out that way, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's discovered that the second or third son actually has talents, and so sometimes the father will make that son the head of the household when he dies. That's not unusual. It's kind of productive in a way of recognizing talent and making sure that your family name moves on, which is actually the point, that your family moves on in a good name with distinguished and honor and all that. So Katsu is adopted into the household, the Kokichi household, and he describes his early life as basically being a spoiled child. His mom, his adoptive mother, who he considers his actual mom, covers for him all the time. The caretaker of the household, Reiji, he's kind of covering for this kid all the time. And his father is very strict, and he talks that it sounds brutal that he was tied to a post and hit in the head with a wooden clog, but that's what you did. I mean, as a parent, because there's only so much crap you can put up with, because even at the age of 5, which is when that happened, his actions can stain the honor of the family. So they have to learn early on not to do things like that. So Katsu is kind of telling us, I was born into the Otani family, which was not very distinguished. My mother was a concubine, which is the best that family could aspire to. And so as a result, it's kind of like being called the son of a whore. Not the best thing, but at least with the concubine, there's some status there, a little bit of a status, where you would actually get a stipend from the government. So as being a concubine and being an acceptable concubine to Katsu's father, she produced this son. Katsu already had a son, born 25 years prior, who was also a member of the administration, which means that his father bought these positions. Now, what's important is that you can buy these positions, but it's up to the person to keep that position. So they still have to work. They still have to show, they have to be distinguished. They have to have honor, all that stuff. So when Katsu is brought in, what Katsu's father is really doing is that he's hoping to expand more positions within the shogunate administration. So what Katsu's father is really doing is not so much that he loves Katsu so much and he wants him in as part of the family. No, not really. What he's trying to do is set up Katsu for a shogunate administrative position so that the family wealth can increase. And that's his goal, to further the Kokichi family, that clan's prestige, and to grow it. That's really all it's about. So then at the end of the reading, we discover that he gives his listed age as 17. He's 7 at the time that this happens. In real life, he's 7 years old. So you go, well, why would you do that? Well, again, this is Katsu's father trying to get him on the track early. Again, this is not something unusual for that time period, where a head of households would kind of go nudge nudge, wink wink, here's some coin, you know, let's start my son early and get the title at least, if not the actual position or job. So by getting him a title and a position, they're already, or a title, they are getting Katsu's foot in the door for later in life for him to be an administrator. So that's why they do that. That's why he lists his name as 17, because that's the youngest age that you can be as a samurai. And so that's what that's going on there. Another thing I would like to point out, and I'll wrap this up here, is at one point I talk about him at the end fighting 20 or 30 boys, and he pulls out his short sword. That is not a metaphor for a stick or anything. Kids at his age, at age 7, when they're training to be samurai, or training to be samurai in Katsu's case, they are actually given swords. They're dulled blades, so they can't really cut and slash. So, you know, you can bludgeon somebody with it, right? But you can't really be stabby or slashy. So this, again, if you're from a samurai family, this is not unusual to have, for a kid to have, 7-year-old to have, believe it or not. Can you imagine having a hyperactive 7-year-old with a freaking short sword running around your house? Well, it was a thing. So anyway, so I just wanted to do that reading, kind of give a little bit of a historical perspective. Maybe we'll do more of these kinds of things later on. I don't know. But this is an interesting book. Like I said, if you come across it, pick up a copy, read it, and enjoy it. Thanks again so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time.